A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan.
Today, we open with a chilling note from the Middle East. A sound that reverberates far beyond the desert sands, reaching even our corner in Southeast Asia. On Sunday, June 22nd, the United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer, a bold strike on Iranian nuclear sites. For the watching world, this was a stark, undeniable signal. The age of military punishment by a superpower is truly, chillingly back upon us. This is a powder keg. For Indonesia, even thousands of miles away, this moment matters deeply. Tonight, we will try to answer some crucial questions. How does the strike fundamentally challenge international law and the global rules-based order? What are the immediate and long-term consequences for global stability and non-proliferation efforts? And what is Indonesia's role, if any, as a nation rooted in peaceful diplomacy in this increasingly volatile world? We will explore these questions in this episode, so stick with us. This is Think Tank with me, Shafiah Muhibat. Let's be brutally honest. There is no existing article in the United Nations Charter that justifies an attack based on a perception of a future threat. International law recognizes a right to self-defense articulated in Article 51 of the UN Charter, but this is typically invoked only if an armed attack occurs. The concept of anticipatory self-defense, or preemption, demands an imminent threat, instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation, as established in the historical Caroline test. If the alleged threat, in this case, the potential presence of a nuclear weapon in Iran, is not yet fully manifest, then an attack is not preemptive, but preventive. And under the UN Charter, a preventive strike launched without an actual armed attack is fundamentally unjustified.
According to the Charter, what has been done by the US is not in line with the content of the Charter. So it can be said that it is illegal based on the international law. If you are aware also that according to the report that has been covered by a lot of news media, that the future threat considered by the United Nations is the possibility of Iran to produce the nuclear weapon. So as far as I'm concerned, if we see the non-proliferation treaty, the convention is actually allow every country to use the nuclear power for a peaceful usage of nuclear energy. Yes. Yeah. So it is legal for every country to do for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy.
So I think the US's attack on Iran raises two immediate questions. Number one is, what is the future of international institutions and the rules-based international order? What the U.S.'s attack signifies is a unilateral military action by a great power reminiscent of the U.S.'s adventures in the Middle East during the global war on terror. What I think arises from the attack is this a return of a might is right type of international order where military action is preferred over diplomacy? Are we going to see further erosion of international law, rules and norms with a preference towards military action over institutions, peaceful resolution of disputes, and so on and so forth? I think these are questions that we could see arising in the long term as a consequence of this attack on Iran.
Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. It has subjected some of its facilities to IAEA inspections. Yes, with acknowledged shortcomings in cooperation, particularly regarding full transparency, but inspections nonetheless. And let's not forget, several rounds of negotiations between the US and Iran were held throughout 2025 to resolve this very nuclear issue. While those negotiations didn't yield all the expected results, they proved one crucial thing: diplomacy was available. An open channel existed. The Iranian foreign minister's recent trip to Moscow, hinting at back-channel coordination, further underscores that diplomatic avenues were not exhausted.
Iran is still a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It famously agreed to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or what is more known as the Iran nuclear deal, in 2015, which the US withdrew from in 2018. I think the attack sets a bad precedent for nuclear non-proliferation in general. I think a question that a lot of the world's sort of rule-bending regimes will have is that if an open channel of diplomacy and negotiation does not shield a country from attack, what incentive does a country have to adhere to international law or principles? I think the longer-term implication may be that countries may actually want to procure or invest in a nuclear program for its own deterrence instead of engaging in diplomacy or national institutions.
So the fundamental question that every rule-bending regime and every nation under pressure will now ask is this: if an open channel of diplomacy and negotiation does not shield the country from attack, then what incentive remains for compliance to international norms? The longer-term implication is terrifying. More states may choose to operate in the shadows, increase ambiguity around their capabilities, and prioritize deterrence through hidden strength rather than transparency through international cooperation. We've seen historical precedents, such as Israel's own policy of strategic ambiguity regarding its nuclear arsenal, which operates outside NPT oversight. This strike deeply undermines the credibility of the International Atomic Energy Agency and the entire logic of disarmament regimes. The IAEA has consistently stated that armed attacks on nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes violate the UN Charter and international law, warning of the grave risk of radioactive releases. Warnings chillingly reiterated when the Russian invasion neared Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia plant. IAEA has repeatedly and publicly condemned such attacks, calling for maximum restraint. What are the immediate and long-term consequences for global stability, non-proliferation efforts, and also the global economy? What are the impacts for Indonesia? Let's try to answer these questions after this. The stealth bombing mission, framed as a preventive strike, ACO's past justifications for unilateral interventions. There were no calls for UN authorization, no real evidence publicly presented that an imminent attack was underway, and minimal consultation with key allies. The lesson is stark. In the current military order, military might tragically trumps legal argument. Multilateralism looks increasingly performative, a stage for declarations rather than genuine consensus. This is a dangerous shift. It will accelerate the militarization of politics, fuel arms races, and place even greater stress on fragile democracies worldwide. For the world, this moment is not just a distant headline. Its ripple effects are already being felt and pose significant challenges. This is even more so for Indonesia, like many energy-importing economies, that is acutely vulnerable to instability in the Middle East. First, there is a strategic choke point of the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow passage is one of the world's most critical maritime arteries, through which roughly 20% of global oil consumption and about 20% of global liquefied natural gas or LNG trade passes. A staggering 80% of the oil and LNG transiting Hormuz is destined for Asian markets, including, crucially, Indonesia. Any significant disruption or closure of the strait, a scenario that the Iranian parliament has reportedly agreed to vote on in retaliation, would send immediate shockwaves through global energy markets. Experts estimate that even a partial disruption could cause Brent crude oil prices, which currently hover around $78.5 per barrel, to surge well past $100, even reaching $110 per barrel. For Indonesia, still setting subsidized fuel prices, this means an immense burden on our state budget, potentially adding tens of trillions of rupiah to our energy subsidy costs in 2025 alone. This pressure could drain our foreign exchange reserves, weaken the rupiah, and fuel domestic inflation, slowing our economic recovery. The Ministry of Finance has already begun preparing mitigation measures, coordinating with financial authorities, and strengthening foreign exchange reserves. But the scale of the challenge is immense.
With regard to the price of the oil energy, as you were aware, that Iran is one of the three largest oil-producing countries in the world. When I went there and I visited the country, I just realized that they're producing 4 million barrels per day. So if something happened with the situation, so it will affect the price of oil. In the long term, it will also affect the trade as well as the financial relation between countries, because there will be possibility of the weakening of our currency, because of the raising price of oil, and also there is there is a limitation for our country to import the key commodities from abroad, because we use a foreign currency, and foreign currency was actually used to buy the oil energy, which is increasing the price.
Second, Indonesia is already experiencing the direct human consequences of regional instability. Our foreign ministry is in a relentless scramble to evacuate Indonesian citizens from the region. As of June 23rd, the government successfully evacuated 96 nationals from Iran via Azerbaijan, with further repatriations planned. This is a challenging task due to the volatile environment, with missiles flying between Israel and Iran. Should this conflict escalate into a wider regional war involving even more actors, Indonesia would face an even bigger humanitarian challenge. The safety and well-being of our citizens abroad, a core responsibility of any government, becomes acutely vulnerable in such volatile scenarios. The human cost, often overlooked in strategic assessments, is immediate and deeply personal for thousands of Indonesians living and working in the region.
For Indonesia, I think the most immediate consequence of this conflict are, broadly speaking, protection of Indonesian citizens within the region, in Iran and around it. And secondly, something that I think the Indonesian government has in mind as well is on the stability of oil markets or the global energy market, since Indonesia buys a lot of oil from the region, specifically from countries such as Saudi Arabia and others, which are transported through critical maritime choke points like the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea or the Strait of Hormuz near Iran. So I think these two things are top of mind for institutions and ministries such as Kemlu and the Indonesian government more broadly.
This unfortunate development may, tragically, embolden some leaders worldwide to think that strength defines right, that restraint is for the weak, and that diplomacy is futile. Is this an urgent call for norms and diplomacy? And what is Indonesia's role, if any? Let's discuss these aspects after this. This unfortunate development weakens moderate voices within states under pressure, and it revives the dangerous idea that history belongs to the strong, not just. This is a dangerous shift that will accelerate the militarization of politics. Indonesia must view this moment not just a distant regional issue, but as a crucial signal of the deeper unraveling of the global order. We cannot afford to fall into the trap of applauding unilateral strength to force submission. This applies not just to current events unfolding in the Middle East, but also to ongoing tensions in Europe, the Asia-Pacific, and elsewhere. The current drift toward a might makes right world is not only profoundly destabilizing, but also utterly unsustainable.
Indonesia should not view this as a distant regional issue, even though it has concrete interests in the Middle East specifically, such as oil and energy markets, and as well as the protection of citizens, but it should view it as a broader issue of the unraveling of the international order and of international norms more broadly. I think what the tradition of Indonesian diplomacy is to voice and emphasize the importance of international institutions, international law, peaceful resolution of disputes, and so on and so forth. And I think during times like these, it is important for countries like Indonesia to voice out and re-emphasize why these norms and values are important. And this applies not just to conflicts in the Middle East, but conflicts elsewhere, such as in Europe, closer within Indonesia's neighborhood as well, of the need of international laws and values for resolving disputes and not using military action as a first line, and instead using diplomacy and existing institutions.
For countries like Indonesia, whose strategic identity has been rooted in peaceful diplomacy, multilateralism, and the sanctity of legal norms since the 1955 Bandung Conference, this is the time to speak up. Our voice, anchored in our free and active foreign policy, becomes more critical than ever. We must advocate for a return to adherence to international law, for the primacy of diplomatic solutions, and for strengthening, not undermining, international institutions like the UN and the IAEA. We need to emphasize that the true path to global security isn't paved with bombs, but with binding agreements, mutual respect, and persistent, patient dialogue. It's about withholding the principles that protect all nations, especially the vulnerable, from arbitrary power. It's about ensuring that the mechanisms for peaceful resolution are strengthened, not discarded at the first sign of friction. The alternative is a world where insecurity reigns, where every nation feels compelled to arm itself to the teeth, and where the specter of widespread conflict looms constantly. This is the moment for courageous diplomacy, for unwavering commitment to multilateralism, and for a collective insistence that the rules-based order, however imperfect, remains our best defense against the chaos of unchecked power. So as the dust settles over Iran, a stark question hangs in the air. Will this moment be remembered as the beginning of a new dangerous era of unilateral might, or as the urgent wake-up call for the world to reclaim the principles of international law and diplomacy? The choice is not distant. It resonates in every capital, in every policy decision, and ultimately in the future we forge together. It is a choice between a world governed by brute force or one where shared norms and a commitment to justice, however challenging, still prevail. The fate of the international order may well depend on which path we collectively choose.